Let's go. Okay, sorry I'm here again. You guys were running out of thoughts for Pizza Talks, so I didn't scrape this off the bottom of the barrel. This is an old talk I had last year, and it's mostly about user experience, because I'm usually interested about this sort of thing. And though it's about user experience, it's not a talk for designers, because user experience is not necessarily the same as user interface. And I'm very interested, for this talk, I was interested in exploring some topics that were not directly related with the visual aspects of the user experience. So this is stuff that happens behind the scenes, and that's mostly the responsibility of developers. So, okay, developing for humans. I'm a software engineer, and I guess I care about that. Okay, first step, it's time. I'm usually very curious about the technology behind the sites that I visit. I tend to open up the Chrome Inspector and check if it's optimized for the front end. And it's usually not. And this is something that bothers me a little, because sometimes it's so easy to optimize the site that it's silly not to. And we all hate this, right? So, why is performance important, especially for public sites, public front ends? Well, Google, a couple of years ago, more than a couple of years ago, they let their users choose the number of results that would appear on their search results page, and they allowed the users to pick a number between 10 and 30. And a lot of users picked 30 because more is better, right? And what happened was that they looked into the data, and they saw that traffic to pages that had 30 results dropped by 20%. That's 1/5. And why? Because there was a half a second delay generating those 30 results on the page. More recently, the Financial Times engineering team, they introduced an artificial delay rendering CSS on their public front ends, and they pretty much figured out that what we already know, that there was a drop in navigation depth that corresponded with the delay that they had introduced. But so we've gotten pretty good at generating these charts out of the way people use or sites or applications. But what about the actual response on humans, the actual biometric response? So Ericsson released a study last year for a mobile video, and they actually hooked up EEGs and ECGs to users as they were using and testing their applications. And they saw that delays resulted in a 48% increase in heart rate. And the funniest sentence in this report is, the level of stress caused by mobile delays was comparable to watching the horror movie. So okay, sorry, I'm checking notes. I haven't delivered this talk in eight months. The media also likes to complain about how the web is getting slower, and Apple is ruining the mobile web because Safari doesn't block, or because it blocks ads, or doesn't, whatever. But they usually do it without any hint of irony. And there's this piece that was written in 2015 criticizing Apple for the state of the mobile web. And it's a 1,500-word article that weighs 3 megabytes and requires 330 requests for an article. So who's really ruining the mobile web? So what can we do as developers, as web engineers, or whatever we are doing right now? So there's caching, which is obvious. There's compression and minification of our front-end assets, and this is usually provided by our tooling, Webpack, and that we were using, Browserify, whatever. There's also concatenation, or it's handled now by, or obviated now by HTTP2, because concatenation stops being an issue. Also domain sharding, because there's a limit to the number of requests you can do per domain at the same time. Also HTTP2 solves this, and providing offline first experiences using service worker for unreliable networks. Also connected with time is money, of course. And so time is not the only reason why optimization is important. So if you're in a mobile data plan, especially if you have a cheap or a freebie that mobile companies sometimes provide, like a 100 megabyte data plan, just for a taster, which would allow you to read one Verge article per day for a month. You feel this strain. You're always trying to not spend too much data. And there was this, at the height of the ad blocking scandal of 2015, when Apple introduced ad blockers, and publishers were all worried that it might get into their revenue. The New York Times released this comparison of various 50 American media outlets, and compared their performance on the 4G connection. So the worst offender, of course, is Boston.com, and on a 4G connection, it would take you 40 seconds to load a page, and you would be paying 30 cents just to watch the advertisements on that page. So you would actually be paying to see advertisements. And we're not even talking about other parts of the world where the network is completely unreliable and data plans are extremely expensive. And this is why things like Opera Mini exist. Anyone here used Opera Mini yet, or tried? So this is a mobile browser, but it doesn't behave the way other mobile browsers do. It relies on a service that's provided by Opera that acts as a proxy that grabs the page that you request and aggressively compresses it and tries to strip out as much wasteful data there is. So images are compressed, sometimes CSS and JavaScript gets stripped out. And this is, Opera Mini is actually very popular in countries like Indonesia or Nigeria or Philippines, where data plans are more expensive. This data is a bit outdated. It's no longer 5.74% of global user share. It dropped to 2.9, I think. But still, this is global user share. This is not just a share of mobile browsers. This is a share of all browsers there is. And 5.7% was by 2013, Opera Mini had 300 million users. That's roughly equivalent to the entire population of the United States. So that's considerable. And if you're ignoring this, especially if you're targeting these emerging markets, Philippines, Indonesia, Nigeria, you're ignoring a considerable amount of people. Okay. Another aspect of user experience is security. And text-based passwords are the most common form of authentication. If you're lazy, there's a good chance that you reuse some of your passwords. If you're really lazy, there's a good chance you only use one password for everything. And if you're really lazy, that password is password. This is quite real. 73% of online accounts use duplicated passwords. So to mitigate the risks of, by the way, there's this. I like how they added this too, just to throw the hackers off. How do we know this? Well, they did not say the word.
I think it changed now.
I don't know.
It's password 1 now.
Oh,
Because you have to get now.
would have thought of that. Yeah. So, okay, to mitigate the risks imposed by this carelessness, system administrators often enforce password policy rules. So they force you to pick complex passwords, a mix of numbers and symbols. They force you to have a minimum password length, or even force you to change your password every few weeks or months. And the point is to make passwords hard to guess for attackers. And by changing them frequently, they would throw off the attackers in case they actually manage to guess it. So they're this equivalent of telling you to eat your vegetables. And you may not like it, but it's for your own good. Except that these password rules don't actually account for actual human behavior. And the thing is, there was a study by researchers at Carnegie Mellon and NIST. They got 6,000 people and asked them to create new passwords to satisfy a variety of password checking algorithms that they have. And for the strictest algorithm, 60% of subjects found the process very annoying, and almost a third of them admitted to having written down their password on a file or on a piece of paper. So there's no point in having these rules if your user is going to go around and write down the password in a place that other people can see it. It kind of defeats the purpose of having all those policies in place. And 31% is considerable. So why is this a problem? Well, this happened. So there was this interview for a reporter of TV5 in France, and they actually had their passwords pasted on. Their password for YouTube was mot de passe, not very original, so it's the equivalent of password. And what happened is that the same morning, all their social media presence was hacked by ISIS. And it wasn't cool.
But they didn't hack it. They just logged in.
Yes, just logged in. Yeah.
And changed to a secure password.
Who knows? It's probably written down. So you should watch the channel in case. Okay, so here's two passwords. Which would you say is easier to remember? Which would you say is more secure? So both passwords, they have the same length. They have a mix of uppercase and lowercase. They have numerals. The difference is that one is shorter and padded by periods. So, what would be the estimated time to brute force each of these passwords? The same, 14.1 trillion years. So this is not actual password strength, because they would still be vulnerable to, well, probably not this one, but if you used an actual word, it would probably still be vulnerable to dictionary attacks of some sort. But still, if you brute force this, it's about the same. And yet, there are services that would not allow you to have a password like this. And banks that would only let you have numerical passwords, or passwords that don't repeat certain characters more than a number of times. There's a file, there's a website called the Password Policy Hall of Shame or something like that, where you see some examples of these ludicrous password rules that they impose, and they make their sites really, really insecure because sometimes they're ridiculous. Like you can't use certain special characters. So enforcing people to have complex passwords is not good for people because, as we've seen, people don't hate having to remember complex passwords. So what's annoying about all these password rules is that they tend to be very inconsistent. So you use a site that tells you that you should have a password of a certain type to satisfy your security policies, and then you go to another site with different rules for their passwords, and for the end user, probably not us, but for the end user, it's confusing and it's annoying, and they don't actually know how to generate a proper password. Even Microsoft, I don't know if this is still the case, but Microsoft had a 16 character limit to their passwords. Outlook and Hotmail. So if you had a password that was longer than 16 characters, it would either reject the password or trim out the remaining characters. So even if password length was irrelevant, and Microsoft actually said that they had that limited because length is irrelevant. But even if it were, why not accept it? Anyway, why prevent us from picking longer passwords?
I reckon that's not acceptable anymore, because you should store only the hash plus a salt. It doesn't matter how long it is anymore.
Right. Yeah. But still, they have this limit for some reason. Probably because they have some legacy system that doesn't encrypt password.
They
don't want to admit it.
In clear text.
Yeah, that's but doesn't make any sense to me. So how do we know that password is the most commonly used password? And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is the second one. And we know this because we have dropped the ball too on several occasions, we as software engineers. Because we store passwords in clear text, or because we improperly hash or create our hashes by not introducing a salt. And even something as simple as password recovery is done wrong by many sites out there. Some sites will, instead of giving you a link for you to create a new password, they will send you your existing password by email, which proves that you're keeping it somewhere. And there was this doesn't happen anymore, but until 2015, WordPress, which powers 95% of the web, used to send passwords for newly created accounts in plain text by email to their users. They've stopped doing that now, fortunately. And so if you think that having a password policy is annoying in terms of user experience, try a debit account or something like that. That would really ruin your users.
I don't think sending the passwords in clear text is bad. The problem is that they keep it. If you have to change it as soon as you log in first time, then it's no problem.
Well, but it should be in a log file somewhere.
Yeah, but what if they don't change it? What if they don't log in immediately? What if someone else gets to the account first? That's still a risk.
Yeah, but it's, like if you have access to an empty account that nobody used, the risk of
Well, it depends, again.
not if it's resetting, but if it's creating a new account and you create your password randomly.
Yeah, but you don't know what the account is for. So for most sites, yeah, it probably doesn't matter.
But the recovery is always a risk, even because when you even if it is linked instead of a password, if you intercept the email, you can always click on it and put whatever password you want.
Yeah.
So you take over anyway.
But it's
Still risky.
less risky.
Discussing severity.
Yeah, but this
It's
is
small. It's
security is really tricky to get right. People have been researching alternatives to text-based passwords for like decades even, and we still haven't found anything that strikes a balance between convenience and security. So we're still stuck with this rules and stuff. So okay, stop confusing people. And by the way, speaking of life-ruining experiences, I love playing this game. You probably heard me talk about it. So this is, if you don't know yet, this is a science fiction shooter made by a company named Bungie, and you play a soldier that goes around the solar system shooting at aliens until the solar system is safe or Bungie stops making money from the game, whichever happens first. So you go on your spaceship and you fight those alien bosses. And by the way, this is my character. His name is Bob. This is last year's stats. They've risen up a bit in the meantime. So you get on your spaceship and you fight your boss encounters. And usually at the end of the most difficult missions, there's a chance that you'll drop this yellow treasure. And these are usually the most valuable ones because they give you exotic piece of armor or weapon. And one of these is particularly notable because it's so bad. So this is probably the crappiest weapon in the game, and it's a yellow reward. And it's a sniper rifle that fires one round and then takes forever to reload, and people hate it. So what happens if I get 4 of them in a row? I would be really upset. What's the game got against me? What am I doing wrong? And it's all because of the RNG. The RNG it can be used to spell angry and enraged. But it's, of course, a random number generator. So randomness is a funny thing because we don't have a clear idea or a clear expectation of what randomness really is. And there's another story. Spotify. When they launched, they had a perfect shuffle algorithm, the Fisher-Yates algorithm for their playlists. And while they were using it, they were also getting emails from their users complaining that they were getting duplicate songs repeated or a number of songs by the same artist in a row. And they were continuing to complain that their playlist generator was broken, even though it was a perfect shuffle algorithm. So we have a very peculiar way to look at randomness, and it's peculiar because it's wrong. And these are 2 samples. One of them is randomly generated, the other was adjusted to appear random. So which one would it be? Which one is the random one?
Left.
It's
And
the right.
Left one, random numbers tend to cluster a bit, and they're not evenly distributed, even though that's what most people, especially people who have looked at statistics.
Can you say that again? You said that random numbers tend to cluster?
They don't tend to cluster. They will cluster a bit. They will appear to cluster.
They will be evenly distributed. Perfectly evenly.
Well, that's a broken random generator.
Yeah.
Because it would, if you do the key square test on that sample, it would point out that it would be.
Yeah, they didn't say cluster.
It's a pseudo-random generator, not like a secure random generator.
Yeah, but it wouldn't give you this sort of evenness. Or it would.
It could,
It could.
yeah. But it might not.
And that's the thing. You're never really sure.
Yeah, probably would.
Okay, so so we have because this happens because we as humans, our human brains have a tendency to see patterns where no pattern exists, and we tend to be fooled by randomness and try to find some meaning in the noise. And so, odd as it may sound, sometimes we actually have to design our randomness, our random algorithms, to provide a better customer experience or a better user experience, so that their expectations match to the stuff that we're giving them. So, okay, hopefully I've given you a different perspective on computer interaction, one that's not bound by the four edges of a computer screen. So a person doesn't even need to be sitting in front of a keyboard to experience this. There are factors of time and money and security and privacy and satisfaction that are not addressed by visual design or better button or better menu. But I'm misled you about the title of this talk. So it's not really developing for humans, it's actually designing and developing for humans. And here's the conclusion of it. My favorite definition of design comes from a guy called Victor Papanek. And he wrote in the introduction to his 1971 book, Design for the Real World, that design is a conscious and intuitive effort to impose meaningful order. And nowhere does he talk about aesthetics or ergonomics or usability. He's talking about design in the broadest possible sense. And the two words that sold me off on this definition are conscious and meaningful. So work with purpose, but also work to provide purpose to others. So in this view, he's talking about design as planning and designing the broadest possible sense. And the most important attributes concern the deliberateness of thought and empathy for the user, or for the person that's going to use your product. So most of this talk came from a frustration that I had with working with designers and working with developers that have worked with designers. And it often happened that no one wanted to be responsible for certain things. So designers didn't want to be responsible for coding, and programmers didn't want to be responsible for design. And there was a gap between these two teams. Sometimes there were actual different teams working in different rooms, and that didn't help at all. And stuff got forgotten and fell through the cracks, and the problems didn't get addressed because these two groups weren't talking to each other like they should. So this disconnect between design and development is well known. There are a number, you can't throw a Google search about whether designers should learn how to code without coming up with a million articles about it and people complaining about that. And these pieces are usually written by a developer who's gotten tired of having to work with a designer that wouldn't cross the bridge. But I'd like to argue for a different thing in the opposite direction. I think that every coder should learn design. And not design in the visual sense. Again, we're talking about design in the broadest possible sense, planning and empathy for the user.
Actually, once I was nagging a design about joking with him, like, how are your drawings going on? And he felt a bit touched. He was a bit arrogant in the answer, and he told me design comes from a German word that means purpose. So,
Very So yeah, every coder should learn to think and care about human problems in the same way that a designer is expected to approach them. And this is not necessarily about aesthetics or ergonomics or usability. It's about a group effort that requires effective collaboration between teams, and that pulls in software engineers and business people as well, because these business people are usually responsible for things like ads or certain aspects of user interaction. And everybody has a responsibility to provide their customers with an excellent experience. So this is what UX, user experience, should be all about. To care about the people who use our products that we build, and they've already entrusted us with their time, their money, and sometimes even their secrets for the opportunity to use our products. And it shouldn't really take a job description to be aware of something as basic as this.